What's your thoughts on government cover-ups or covert societies attempting to control humanity? Do you believe in ancient astronauts, intergalactic communication, or extraterrestrial visitations? Ever had an experience with disembodied spirits or the paranormal universe? Are these subjects fact or fiction? Each week, Tony and Eddie explore these unbelievable realities and beyond. Exclusively on Truth Be Told.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Truth Be Told, where we believe an experience becomes truth. I'm your host, Tony Sweet, and joining me now in studio, my co-host, Walt Lusk. We want to thank you for supporting our sponsors, Conscious Life Expo, by going to consciouslifeexpo.com to get your tickets for their February 2015 event, which starts next Friday, February 6th through the 8th. So make sure you get your tickets.
Be there. And take your mind on a literary journey by traveling over to adventuresunlimitedpress.com to purchase all the books from our famed experts featured right here on Truth Be Told.
Today's show, we are honored to have author Frank Joseph as he will touch on his latest masterpiece, Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age, which releases this spring, and we are so looking forward to it. Frank is a former editor of Ancient American Magazine who has authored more than 20 books on ancient history.
And including his books Before Atlantis, Atlantis and Lemuria, Atlantis Encyclopedia, as we talk today about Atlantis, and we'll bring into the play of the weather. The weather, you ask? Well, Frank has some very interesting connections between Atlantis and a possible coming ice age.
As the weather continues to change rapidly before our eyes, I can't wait to ask Frank the connection that led him to his latest book, Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age. So let's get to it. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage,
Frank Joseph.
Frank Joseph. Yay, Frank! You there?
Introduction to follow.
Right. Well, it is an honor, and I have to say, as we were going through all of your books and your knowledge and your research for many years, this is a pleasure to have someone of your status on the show. Truth Be Told is coming up on pretty much your anniversary here in a couple months, and it's made a big impact on my life because I always say I'm not an expert, I'm an enthusiast.
Yes, we're enthusiasts.
Yes, we learn from people like yourself. So
Absolutely.
I don't have a lot to give to you other than my attention
and enthusiasm.
And enthusiasm. So, Frank, first of all, I really am interested. When I saw the book coming out, Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age, I'm like, how does he get these two together?
Even though I know that we're going to talk about global warming, hopefully, I'm with you. Earlier in the early 80s, we were talking about global cooling, and then all of a sudden it got changed to global warming. What a coinkydink. So
take it away and tell us how did these two end up on your title of the book?
Well, in a nutshell, people are generally familiar with Atlantis, that it was this high-level civilization that existed a long time ago, and that the reputation is that it destroyed itself, that it had achieved some levels of technology or high culture, and this worked quite well for it for a while, but technology, being a wonderful servant, is a very cruel and terrible god. And the Atlanteans apparently became technocrats. They became obsessed with all the material benefits that their technology could afford them. And, of course, they wanted more and more, and it backfired on them and utterly destroyed their civilization. And what is interesting about that is that I see parallels with my own civilization, which is also at the feet of the great technological god. Mm-hmm. There's nothing wrong with technology. I think it's great. It's wonderful. That's what human beings are about, is to bring into material existence those things that they can envision. That's part of our genius. But anything can be abused, and I see that our own civilization as a parallel to this self-destructive high civilization in the past. And that's the general correlation between Atlantis and the coming ice age, because that is inevitable.
Right.
There's debate on whether we have actually entered in the ice age, but whether we've entered into this new one or we're faced with a new glacial epoch, it doesn't make much difference, because the ice age is definitely either here or right around the corner.
Now, can I interrupt you for a second? And when you talk about technology,
Yeah, go right ahead.
Technology from the city, Atlantis, can you be a little more elaborative of what you're talking about, by chance?
Well, I can just give you an example. The Hopi Indians in the American Southwest have traditions that go back long before the first modern white Europeans arrived here in the
Absolutely.
19th or late 18th and early 19th centuries.
Absolutely.
And among their wonderful traditions that they've preserved over the course of unknown generations, they talk about a place that's very similar to Atlantis. Now, these guys did not read Plato, or they were not familiar with the Greek classics, in which Atlantis, that's our word. We get that from the Greeks. Atlantis is really an English version of Atlantikos, as Plato described it. Well, they didn't use the word Atlantis, but they talked about these former island civilizations from which their people came, their ancestors came. And one of the things that they said, that the Hopi say, that typified this past great kingdom from which their ancestors fled after a great flood, was they had something called the Patumatuvas. And the Patumatuvas basically mean a kind of a flying mat, a flying carpet, if you will, although that is just as a poetic name for it. But the Patumatuvas are these flying machines that the Hopi say were used by their ancestors on this Atlantis-like island long ago, and that they mastered this type of craft that could actually defy gravity and transport human beings from one place to another. Now, if that's fantasy, it's interesting if it is, because on the other side of the world, people that had absolutely nothing to do with the Hopis, and we're talking now about the ancient inhabitants of India, and in their written legacies, they talk about something called the Vimanas. And the Vimanas are also these flying machines that were operated by an Atlantean type of people. And David Hatcher Childress, whose books you carry, of course, has written an excellent book on Vimanas and Atlantis. It came out, I guess, about 10 or 15 years ago. It's since been revised. And he is the first researcher in English that has brought these Puranas, as they're referred to, these epics, these Indian epics, into the United States and the English-speaking world. And it's remarkable that anybody that's familiar with the Patumatuvas or the Hopi will see pretty much the exact same thing reflected in the Puranas of ancient India as brought forth and translated by David Hatcher Childress. That's just as one example.
He's mentioned the Vimanas.
There are many others, but that
aliens.
is one I think that really stands out. I think the chances of two completely unrelated peoples coming up with the same kind of technology associated with the same type of Atlantean civilization, I'd say that's stretching it to say it was just a matter of coincidence. I think that they are separate peoples who had a common legacy, a common inheritance, that when the Atlantean civilization collapsed, it was a huge civilization, very populous, that some people went to North America and other people went to the Indian subcontinent. And that's as a conclusion, I think, which is actually unavoidable. The more you look into these parallels, this is by no means the only one. It's hardly the tip of the iceberg.
Right. Now, for us listeners that aren't totally familiar, where do you believe, or where was Atlantis on the globe?
Well, if we go on the best source that we have for Atlantis, and that, of course, is the Greek philosopher Plato,
yes,
who about 2,400 years ago wrote his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, and he talks about Atlantis. And he describes Atlantis in great detail. And he describes Atlantis not as a continent. He describes it as a large island, a rather circular island, somewhat circular island, that is surrounded by a ring of high mountains. And the implications, and that's all it is an implication from Plato's story, is that this island existed outside what he called the Straits of Gibraltar.
Okay.
Or, no, excuse me, that's what we call it, Straits of Gibraltar. They call the Pillars of Hercules.
Mm-hmm.
That's because on the island of Gibraltar there was a great temple to Hercules, which no longer exists, and there were two marvelous columns up there. So they refer to that as the Pillars of Hercules. And that marked the end of the Mediterranean world and the beginning of the Atlantic world. And on the western side of the Pillars of Hercules, Plato said, is this large island with a circular arrangement of mountains. Well, lo and behold, in 1949, Dr. Maurice Ewing, who was doing the first post-war sonar survey of the ocean bottom in the Atlantic Ocean, about 270 to 300 miles due west of the Straits of Gibraltar, found something called the Horseshoe Seamount. And the Horseshoe Seamount is a large island that has a ring of mountains around it, and that when the National Geographic did this 1949 survey, they found a couple of interesting things. One of the volcanic mountains in this great mountain range on the Horseshoe Seamount had collapsed within recent times meaning recent geologic times. In other words, within the last 10,000 years. The other thing they found was that a number of these mountains, these underwater mountains, they're called seamounts, have beach sand, large quantities of beach sand. And beach sand can only be formed by the interaction of waves on a shore.
Right.
And in order for that much beach sand to still be in existence today means that those mountains must have gone underwater in the recent geologic past within the last 10,000 years. So here we have Plato's description of this large circular island outside the Straits of Gibraltar, and then the existence of this place has now been confirmed. It has been confirmed since 1949. The place has been visited, but the technology, unfortunately, may or may not yet exist in order to do the proper exploration of this site because of the enormous deposits of mud and silt. People think that, all you need to do is get in a submarine, go down there, look out the porthole, and lo and behold, there's Atlantis. If there are any ruins there, that's by no means the case. If there are ruins on the Horseshoe Seamount, they are covered not just by water, but by, could be maybe cubic miles of deposits, specifically silt and mud. So we need a kind of technology that can look beneath that. But I'm getting ahead of myself on that. But that is, so I believe that the last manifestation of Atlantis was on this Horseshoe Seamount because it is so beautifully described and mirrored in Plato's account. I also believe that Atlantis was a very old civilization, and the reason that it reached such high levels of technology and culture was because it didn't go through the cycles of birth, decline, and death like the rest of civilizations do. It had seemed to escape, for the most part, those cycles.
You talk about the fact that you think there have been more than one civilization.
Yes.
Okay, like many. And I know from other guests and research I've done, there might have been some 10,000 years ago.
Oh, I think absolutely. When we go back now, there are tremendous finds being made in recent years. The most famous, of course, is Göbekli Tepe in South Turkey.
Yes, we had
and here is a highly advanced ceremonial site. This is not a primitive location. You have bas-reliefs. You have people that obviously have a cosmology. And remarkably, this place in southern Turkey called Göbekli Tepe has references to the same constellations that we regard in our astrological way. For example, there's references at Göbekli Tepe to the constellation Scorpio and other constellations, Libra and so forth. Site, of course, is dated back to over 9,000 years ago.
Wow.
And that's, less than 1,000 years since the last ice age. Now they found a related site, which is even marginally older, called Tel Kamel.
And where's that located?
That's about at least 500 years older even than Göbekli Tepe.
Wow.
Then there's a site, of course, in Southeast Asia, in Java, as a matter of fact, Gunung Padang, which is even older, goes back to about 11,000 years. And so I think that civilization, yes, is much older than we used to believe. And when we realize that at that time, about 10,000, 12,000 years ago, the sea levels were 300 to 400 feet lower than they are today. That's because the ice locked up all of that water. That global ocean was 300 to 400 feet lower than it is today. And then
That's
when
amazing.
the ice age came to abrupt end, you had flooding that is beyond any producer in Hollywood to reproduce.
Right.
The tsunami that overwhelmed Indonesia, or another one that overwhelmed Japan a few years ago, were nothing, tiny, hardly noticeable ripples compared to what happened when those glaciers melted, and many of them melted suddenly. And when they did, the oceans of the world rose quickly from their levels almost 400 feet to what they are to the present day. They rose not all at once, they rose in great surges, great spurts, that's
Right.
now understood. And all those great land masses that had been dry land for many thousands of years were suddenly inundated. And of course, human beings were around at that time, and of course they occupied some of these areas. And I think that that is part of the basis for the story that we know about Atlantis.
And this can explain why the technology of Atlantis did not
Survive.
because if the sea levels, rose that fast, a lot of that technology was lost, and so the civilization had to pretty much restart over. Correct?
The only salvation for any knowledge at all about this high technology was in the mythic accounts of survivors. Imagine a city like Chicago that would be hit with a hydrogen bomb, and then another hydrogen bomb would go off in Lake Michigan and flood it, and you'd leave it alone for maybe about 5,000 years. What would be left? What would we know about such a place? It would be seared into our consciousness in the form of legends, but there would be very little left to indicate that there was a high culture there at one time. And I believe that that, in effect, is what took place long ago.
And so you would think, though, with the technology that they had, and this is just playing the dumb blonde from Kansas, but the technology they had would actually help them in some ways survive this catastrophe.
Well, unless it was too overwhelming.
True.
No, I don't believe that that was the case. I think that you're right. I think that's a very good point. I've never considered that before, and I think it's interesting to note that how is it that their high technology wasn't involved in saving these people?
Exactly.
And that's because they were not focused on their salvation. They were focused on greed.
Oh.
They were focused on using their high technology primarily for mining purposes. That was the last gasp of Atlantean civilization. They became obsessed with mining prodigious amounts of copper. The reason why they did that is because they were able to combine copper with zinc and tin and created this incredibly valuable metal, which Plato referred to as orichalcum, which orichalcum is a Greek word, which just or rather a Latin version of orichalkos, a Greek word, which means just an incredibly high level of copper, so high level that it becomes a precious metal. So they were involved in doing that, and that was the basis of their incredibly wealthy economy. And then when everything exploded and nature snapped back at them, they were totally unprepared because the whole focus of their civilization was inward and self-indulgence, and that's why they didn't prepare for it.
Now, during your research, why do you think that the sea levels rose so fast? Do you think it was a comet, asteroid? Why do you think it caused the oceans to rise so fast?
What I try to do, and preface my remarks to answering this question, is what I try to do in all my books, all my research is I try to find out really what science says about these things, not my own personal opinion, which is worthless. I try to find out really what have we learned up to this point, the hard science of it. I want to know only the truth, what really happened. I'm not interested in promoting anybody's theory, least of all my own. I want to know what really happened. And according to science, the end of the Ice Age was prompted by the wobble of the Earth. It is now understood. It's been known really since about the 1920s, thanks to a very great Serbian genius by the name of Milošević. Malkovich was a scientist in the 1920s who discovered why the ice ages take place, and it took about another 20 or 30 years after he made this hypothesis for it to be generally accepted now among climatologists. And the way the ice ages take place is because the Earth not only rotates on its axis, it also wobbles.
Right.
And if we wobble in a position in such a way that the northern hemisphere inclines away from the sun, that means that the direct rays of the sun do not reach the northern hemisphere and temperatures plummet. Then when the Earth wobbles back, in which the northern hemisphere now inclines toward the sun, then the direct rays of the sun warm up the atmosphere. Now, it's been found that this process of heating and cooling begins gradually over time. But as the heat either builds up or the heat declines, the atmosphere becomes incredibly unstable and goes through periods of violent oscillations. And it's just like anything else. If you set a crack in the ice, it will spread slowly, but in time it will go quickly and will break up the entire ice sheet. And essentially, that's the same thing that happens with our atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
So that ice ages now are understood to begin gradually. It was thought that they always are just gradual affairs, and that you hardly notice, all of a sudden we're in an ice age. Well, we've had cold conditions like this for the past 1,000 years. It's true to an extent, but then when it reaches that point of no return, there are violent oscillations, and ice ages are now known to begin and end violently, and that's part of the process. It's accumulation of too much heat. The environment can take it, but then it gets to a point where the resistance in the environment cannot take it any longer, and the dam bursts, as it were.
My understanding is the North and South Pole, the axes have actually reversed, and we're due for that.
Or we will, not yet, because we would have felt it.
Well, we're overdue.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
Well, yeah, that's absolutely correct. But at the same time, we have to understand that the important thing is are the temperatures itself, the reversal of the magnetic poles and so forth.
Yes.
They are associated with these temperature changes. So I think that if you have a reversal of the magnetic poles, that is really more a symptom than a cause of what goes on. There's a lot of meteorological disarray that takes place. And the the magnetic shifts, that is almost ancillary to the more crucial changes that take place.
Well, I'm going to ask you about this, and this is in Frank's new book, Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age, and it says, reveals the Atlantean and Mayan prophecy of the external cycle of global creation, destruction, and renewal, and how we are headed into the destructive phases. Is this something that during your research that you saw or you see in their prophecies of both the Mayan and the Atlanteans?
When I first visited Yucatan back in 1986, I was doing research for my early Atlantis books at that time, and that was the first time in these six that I'd even heard of the so-called Mayan calendar prophecy about how there would be this major end of time,
right,
the end of the long count on sunrise of the winter solstice in the year 2012. And I wanted to know, really, what did the Maya themselves say? Of course, the Maya still exist, or at least their mixed descendants exist in low numbers. And some of the elders are still around, and they will talk to people who honestly ask them questions. And they told me what the end of this count means. They said that all of these long counts are associated with this great gift that was given their ancestors by the serpent. And the Maya, they call him Kukulkan. The Aztecs knew him, Quetzalcoatl. This is the most important figure throughout all of the Mesoamerican cultures. And the feathered serpent is described as this tall, fair-haired man with his family and followers who arrived on the shores of Yucatan, and they fled a place called Patutlan. This is described in a Maya book, which anyone can get a hold of. It's called the Popol Vuh, Popolvuh. It means the Book of Counsel. You can get it from Amazon.com. There's some excellent translations of it. And there you'll read this story of this place called Patutlan, which means the place of the red daylight. That is a poetic term meaning that Patutlan was way across the Atlantic Ocean, far in the east. And Patutlan is described in the Popol Vuh as this fabulous kingdom in which all these magicians and sorcerers have all this great power. And one day, because they had done some evil things, Patutlan caught on fire and was submerged beneath the sea. And the feathered serpent, along with his followers, arrived on the shores of Yucatan. Now, it's remarkable. Here again, we have a story that is extremely like Plato's story of Atlantis, and to suggest that the Mayas were in cahoots with Plato and other Greeks to pull the wool over the eyes of archaeologists is going a little too far. So, after the feathered serpent, Kukulkan arrived, he's described not as a conqueror. He did not arrive like the Spaniards many thousands of years later. He came to share his powers and his knowledge with the local people, and which made abundant sense. There were only a few of them, and they're not going to take on the whole civilization like the Spaniards did. So he is revered as, not as a god, revered as a great man who shared all these wonderful gifts, weights and standardized weights and measures, how to build temples, medicine, law, economy, all these things. And amongst these gifts of civilization was his almanac, or calendar, the sacred calendar. So if you speak to a Mayan elder, and they're proud of their people and their achievements, but they all tell you, we did not invent the Mayan calendar.
Oh.
We inherited the Mayan. And people before us had the calendar. Like the Olmec were American people who seeded the Maya. They had the calendar. They did it either. They inherited it by their servant. And they're very serious. They don't claim that there's a legend or I mean, they could claim people are great. We have this fabulous mathematical work of genius, but they never say that. They say we inherited it, we updated it, we changed it to our time. We used our own terminology, but the almanac is the feathered serpents, our ancestors. And the almanac is kind of like a way that you can apply astrology to an entire civilization, an entire society. The purpose of the almanac is to show people what could possibly happen. Show them, especially if longer live according to the laws of nature. That's the thing that's really stressed. That when human beings begin to sin against the very principles that brought them into existence, they can expect extinction. As many species, there are more species extinct over time than exist today.
That's true.
And human beings are not exempt from this process.
Probably not.
This is essentially what the Maya will say. And this almanac was based on 4 global catastrophe that took place. And the last of these global catastrophes was called 4 in the Aztec language, which means 4 water. 4 standing for the 4 cardinal directions. That means it was a global, worldwide phenomenon. It wasn't a regional or localized thing. And Atl refers to this great flood that wiped out a former civilization.
Would that be Noah's Ark situation or not?
Serpent came from.
Is that the Noah's Ark situation or is that different?
That's quite a jump right now. If you don't mind, I to stick with the Maya.
There we go.
There we go.
I'm okay. Fair enough.
But so the idea of the Mayan calendar, to put it in a nutshell, whenever humans go out of sync with the laws of nature, they expect them to have a global catastrophe. And what the Maya say, in effect, is that the Mayan calendar ends, which was of the winter solstice.
Yes.
in 2012, that would be the end of another age, another epoch, and with it, that civilization, if that civilization was not in accord with the laws of nature. Now, they never indicated that the world was going to end.
Well, that's true. That's
December
very
21st,
true. Yeah.
2012. They never said that. They did say, and what they still insist, is that this is an allegory. They picked out the sun, the winter solstice. Why? Because the winter solstice is the shortest
day of the
year. It's the longest night.
Right.
It's a full moon. And according to their calculations, 2012, the shadow would have fallen over world's civilization. And that shadow would get darker as time would go on. In effect, we would enter a kind of a dark age that would eventually completely eclipse civilization as it would exist in the early 21st century. And that's what they're saying. It's not that there would be a sudden end to everything, but there would be an end. An end would be made. That was the final line. Now, did we get our act together by 2012?
No.
Did we somehow become more virtuous? And perhaps there are virtuous people in our society. Or did we continue messing about with the laws of nature? So
same old.
It hasn't been decided. History is very difficult to determine if you haven't lived it yet. Even if you have lived it, it's hard to figure it out. But if you're in the process of going through a major historical event, it's hard to tell. But that's basically what the Maya said. I hope I've made myself clear.
No, that was great.
Maya never said that the world would end, but they did say it would end all of a sudden on the 21st of December. But what they did say is that was the final straw, as it were. So after I learned this was what the Maya say. This is not my interpretation of it. I tried to look around and say, well, what would kill our civilization? What is there in the early 21st century that would kind of fit in with something powerful enough to shut down our civilization, and how would we be somehow involved in that? And I found that, well, it's true that our planet lives in a shooting gallery, as far as asteroids and comets and things like that are concerned, but I don't really see that happening anytime soon, not realistically. But I did find a couple of scenarios, several scenarios actually, that could really spell the end of our civilization, in which we do play a role, and that we are at least partially responsible. And the Ice Age is one of these scenarios because human population, the pollution of human population, is swirling towards the poles. The air currents of the globe funnel, as it were, concentrations of industrial pollution at the North and the South Pole. And as a consequence, we are seeing now major calving going on in the Antarctic ice shelves. There's a very dangerous situation with a very large ice shelf, which is melting faster than climatologists believe possible. If that ice shelf at the Antarctic collapses, you're going to see a sudden sea rise, perhaps by as much as 20 feet. That's hard to imagine.
That's crazy.
A worldwide rise of 20 feet. That would be enormously catastrophic for millions of people living right on the edge of the sea. I'm thinking places like Bangladesh or the Maldives, places like that will just be suddenly underwater. That's
Miami.
just part of it. As regards ourselves, us here in the United States, that pollution now is seen to have heated the Arctic to such an extent that it will be ice-free in a few years. What does that mean? That means that this heat now, which is concentrating at the North Pole, is suppressing the jet stream. And it is the jet stream which makes the Arctic cold. That's all that cold air that's swirling around the Arctic Circle. Well, if you have a situation where heat is now developing at the North Pole, it is pushing that jet stream farther down along the continent, and it's pushing it much further south. That's adding to the Ice Age glacial conditions that we can expect. Now, that's not the main cause or the main trigger, but that is part of the Ice Age scenario that is developing here. The main reason, however, that we are going to have an Ice Age, and there's no getting away from it, is because we are now in the process of our planet is tilting away. The northern hemisphere is tilting away from the direct sun rays of the solar rays of the sun, and that this will inevitably bring us an Ice Age, a return of glacial conditions. Now, when I was on the internet trying to find out what was the general consensus of climatologists, I went, the internet, of course, is the information highway, but the information highway also has a gutter, and you have to be careful of your sources. So I went almost primarily to government and university sources on this. And I found out that the consensus among climatologists, the consensus is, yes, we are due for an Ice Age. Some of them will say we're due for an Ice Age maybe within the next 500 years, which is geologically very soon, but a growing number of climatologists are saying, nope, it's going to be sooner. Some climatologists even believe we're in the beginnings already of a glacial epoch, and that it's going to accelerate. So it's a strange, ironic situation here where global heating or global warming is causing global cooling. In other words, it's suppressing that jet stream that brings all that cold air to the south, and it's contributing to these Ice Age conditions which are in the offing. And when the next Ice Age comes, or the next glacial epoch, that's what they refer to. Climatologists don't like to use the word Ice Age. They refer to it as a glacial epoch. And when that comes, there will be an increase in temperature, a rather decrease in temperatures for sure, and they'll be noticeable. But then, after a time, who knows how much time, a few years, a few decades, a few centuries, who knows, then conditions will get violent. And we will see extremes going on. We will see storms of a magnitude that human beings have not experienced since caveman days. So I see that as not as a possible scenario, but as an inevitable scenario.
So
that we are going to have resumption of Ice Age conditions. The only question is when. And it may happen.
So you're saying as a result of global warming, we're going to have global cooling?
Yes. We are having global cooling.
Okay. We are
2014,
experiencing global cooling.
Last year was the hottest year on record.
Okay. Yes.
Globally.
There was an article in the LA Times here in Southern California about that. Yes.
Right. But at the same time, we experienced temperatures in the upper Midwest in the last couple of winters that broke all records. We had, for example, last year and the year before, we had blizzards here in Minnesota in May. Oh. And that was unprecedented. It was in mid-May. I mean, Minnesota is certainly a cold place. There's no doubt about it. But to have that kind of condition, I mean, that was a shock to everybody. Yeah. That was a shock. And we had a number of unprecedented cold temperatures all through the upper Midwest.
Yes,
and that's because of this depression of the jet stream caused by global heating, which is concentrating at both of the poles. And like I said, you can see the effects also at the South Pole now, a very worrying situation.
Well, they're getting a lot of snow.
Enormous ice shelf. That ice shelf down there that is melting, that could break off, it's about the size of Nevada or something like that.
Wow.
Okay.
We're not talking about just, a little peninsula of ice or something you can walk on. We're talking about as big as one of the largest states of the United States. Antarctica is a huge place, and it's melting. When that comes off, that's going to be a major shakeup.
And this goes back to the Atlantis connection, because we're so caught up we're caught up in our greed, we're caught up in our own lives, we're caught up in political backlash of no it's not, yes it is, no it's not, yes it is, and we're gonna, by the time it happens, we're gonna be so far where we could have prevented ourselves maybe building domes or whatever we could have built to protect us.
And I'll concur with you from a technological perspective. They've been getting more stuff about Google, for example, that they are just gobbling up anything and everything they can about any of us, and they're also very, very innovative right now in robotics.
Well, I'm glad to see that. You see, there are these good impulses that are going on. I don't condemn our civilization totally. I mean, I don't say it's all rotten and corrupt and it deserves all this. I don't see that, and that's the tragedy of it. There are persons like yourselves and people like say on Google that are trying to do the best they can. That's the real tragedy. If we were all just a bunch of self-indulgent greed fanatics, well, then let them go. They're worthless. But that's not the case. It's only, well, like the old Russian saying goes, society is like a fish. It rots from the head downwards. And that's the same thing.
Or it doesn't know it's wet.
Yeah, out at the top. And that's what's causing it. And that's the tragedy in there. So, well, the Ice Age is only part of this scenario, really.
Right.
And I devoted a long chapter to something which few people know about. And this will really keep you up at night. The Ice Age is inevitable, right? But it may not happen for several hundred years. I grant that. I think it'll happen sooner, but this one is worse.
Well, and there was
280 million years ago. That's a long time ago.
That's a long time, and we're
280 million
due.
years ago. Something really bad happened.
And we're definitely due.
And what be that?
No.
Well,
yeah, tell us.
We know that there have been extinction events over the long 4.5 billion year history of our beloved planet. The most famous, of course, are the dinosaurs that got wiped out by an asteroid collision. And about 65, maybe 70% of all life on Earth was wiped out. That's terrific. Wow, we came back from that. That's nothing. There was something known as the Permian Extinction. 280 million years ago, a minimum of 89% of all life on Earth died all of a sudden, a minimum. More likely in the low 90 percentile.
That's crazy.
Incredible how we could have come back from that.
And what caused it?
What on earth caused the Permian extinction? That's what scientists have known about the Permian extinction for a long time, I think since the late 19th century. But nobody could figure out what could have possibly caused that. An asteroid collision? Impossible. Because an asteroid collision strong enough to have wiped out 90% of the living population of the Earth would have completely blown our planet to bits.
Right.
It had to be something else, and nobody could figure out all the scenarios. Nothing checked out. Gamma ray bursts, all this sort of thing. Nothing checked out until the early 1990s. An American scientist who I'll make this as quickly as possible. I'll just cut to the chase. Read the book.
Yeah, read the book.
He found out what caused it, and that is something at the bottom of the sea.
Oh, really?
At the very bottom of the sea, it's very cold down there. And underneath the bottom of the sea are these enormous pockets of methane gas.
Oh, I've heard this
Huge.
before.
And they are held in check by a kind of a lattice work or a great network of what they call hydrates, ice hydrates. It's like a big web or a net that's formed. It freezes down there. And it keeps these pockets of methane in check because it's so cold down there.
But if it warms up...
What happened 280 million years ago took place in Siberia. And in those days, Siberia was on the ocean, was right next to the ocean because the continents were drifting around.
Yes.
And in Siberia, there is a range of volcanic mountains, which are referred to today as the Siberian Traps. And this mountain range blew up. It went off, as volcanoes have. Inclined to do that from time to time, only
Right.
a whole bunch of them went off at one time. And that also happens in modern history, too. So the Siberian Traps went off. They began to explode. And when they did that, when they erupted, they extruded huge amounts of hot magma. And that magma kept pouring into the sea. And when that hot magma kept pouring into the sea, it finally got to the bottom of the sea. It was still hot, and it melted those hydrates, those ice traps that kept the methane in check. And an enormous megabubble, as it's referred to, an enormous megabubble of methane rose to the surface of the sea. And when that happened, when that bubble burst, an inconceivable amount of methane exploded into the atmosphere. And when it did that, it turned into little droplets. And methane itself, even that amount going into the atmosphere, would not have been catastrophic. It would have dispersed in time. But the methane was all in little droplets, a little spray. And when that spray was carried by the winds towards the Siberian traps, which were still erupting, you had a global incandescent explosion. The explosion and the resulting toxicity from this bubble that burst, this methane, wiped out 90% of all life in the sea and over the sea.
That's crazy.
And it happened not once, but possibly twice. Happened maybe a few million years later. That's not so sure, but the Permian explosion definitely took place. Okay, well, what does that have to do with us? That's 280 million years ago. That's a long time ago. We made it back, obviously. Well, guess what? At the bottom of the sea today, there are still these methane traps. That's the way our planet is made. These methane deposits, huge, gigantic, and they're all held in check. No reason to worry about them. They're held in check by this great network of ice hydrates. They're down there because it's so cold. Well, it used to be that cold. And what we've been doing is we've been drilling for oil.
Uh-oh.
And when we drill for oil, there's always major spills going on, especially this last one that erupted into flames in the Gulf of Mexico.
Right.
And as a consequence, the temperatures of the ocean are rapidly rising.
Uh-oh.
Even at the very bottom of the ocean, they are experiencing significant rising of temperatures. Right now, at this point, not enough to melt those traps. But if things go on this way, if we continue to expand oil research and production, and the temperatures at the bottom of the ocean continue to rise, those traps will be melted, and it takes a very small area of the traps to melt. If you melt just something like about the size of a manhole cover in one of these ice packs,
wow,
you will create a situation that cracks will develop, and eventually the entire lattice work will break free, and we will have a mega bubble that will burst in precisely the same way. And even if that mega bubble does not come in contact with any fire any place, the toxicity involved will be enough to kill many millions of people, all living things in the sea and above it.
And
that's what really concerns me, because that is a real possibility. I even read during my research after the book was published, I can mention it here, there are some oil research companies that know about these hydrates who want to drill into them.
What?
They want to drill into these hydrates so they can have direct access to the methane
gas.
They say, well, our technology now, we can do that, and it'll be perfectly safe.
Yeah, we can handle it.
Yeah,
the oil industry doesn't have the most perfect safety record that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And I don't feel too comfortable with that. But I can tell you this, that if the temperatures of the ocean continue to rise, and they're rising much faster than anybody ever understood. I've got that in the book. I've got my sources for all this, by the way. This is not anything I've made up. This is not a science fiction scenario. I've got some pretty thick footnotes in the back if you want to check them out. I don't make a single statement in there. Almost every sentence is footnoted. And if those temperatures continue to rise, I guarantee you they're going to melt a hole in those hydrates. And God help us if that happens. There's zero defense against it, no warning. It'll just happen, and it has happened. Now, I'm not the only one that points this out. I'm just the first guy, I guess, that's really publicized it. This is known amongst oceanographers and many different types of life scientists who are aware of the situation, but it has not been publicized because there's nothing you can do about it except get out of the oil business. Our civilization must find an alternative to petroleum so that we don't go messing about at the bottom of the sea. The sea is the cradle of life, as Tennessee Williams said. And it absolutely is. If we destroy the sea, we are finished.
Mm-hmm.
There is nothing we can do to.
And
there are whole areas of the sea now that are dead zones. I mean, that's an intolerable situation.
Yes, it is.
We have fished numerous species out of existence, and continue to do so. But all those things are terrible. But boy, the crowning achievement of our destruction of the seas and of ourselves will be if we in fact melt those ice hydrates. And you can kiss the whole thing goodbye. We're wiped out. We're finished, and whatever survives afterwards will need another 280 million years to put it all back together again. But it has happened. I mean, this is not an alarmist scenario. But that also perfectly fits the Maya prophecy, which said that, which implies, I can't say said, which implies, because we don't have all of the prophecy, that human beings will be responsible for what happens. And if that's the case, we will be responsible, because the oceans don't heat by themselves. No. And there's a perfect balance down there. There are some hot spots, admittedly, at the bottom of the ocean, but that's all part of the great mechanism of our planet. But if the hydrates are melted, or we go down there and we drill a hole in them to get the methane, all that methane. Wow, isn't that cool? Well, you'll get all the methane, all right? You'll get more than you bargained for.
Oh, yeah. And Frank, I have to say, we have
that's what concerns me.
We have about 2 minutes left, and this at the beginning, I know it went fast, and our invitation already goes out to you for another round.
Oh, absolutely.
Eddie Connor, who's another co-host of ours, he's a psychic, and he is a huge fan of Atlantis, and he really wanted to be here, but unfortunately there was a death in the family, so he couldn't make it. But we, at the beginning of the show, we said, how did the climate of an ice age and Atlantis happen? And it shows you in your book of how we, as a human beings on this planet in 2015, our technology is so advanced, and we keep, America is the greatest country, but unfortunately, the lost civilization, a mirror of our world, is exactly the tagline on your book, because we keep mucking it up. We have the technology to do a lot of things, and we're using them for the wrong reasons. So, so how do people find the book? Because this is a book that we need to read.
Get out.
Yeah.
It's out soon, right?
Well, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to discuss this, because I think it's pretty important to us all. But if people want to get a copy of the book, they just go to Amazon.com. I think it's already up on Amazon.
Okay.
Although the book will not be out for about another 6 or 7 weeks, something like that. If anybody wants to get in touch with me or see what's going on with me, I don't have a website, but I have a website that I work through for the magazine that I write for, and that is ancientamerican.com. And some of my books, most of my books are, I guess, carried by Ancient American. And there are ways on there. There's links where you can, if you want to contact me or ask me anything, I'd be glad to hear from any of our listeners on this. And it's great sharing it. I don't consider myself an expert like you portrayed me in the beginning. I'm just like you. I'm a student. I'm an enthusiast about these things. And we all have knowledge about these various questions. And I think it's great when we come on a show like this and can share them. But I don't consider myself any different than yourself when it comes to these issues.
Well, today Walt and I and our listeners were students of you, because
yes, indeed, you're still an expert in our minds.
Yeah, you're amazing,
well,
and
that's
we
very
really
kind
appreciate
of you to say that.
Well, thank you.
Well, we hope that you come back, and like I said, this is just hopefully a part one,
a teaser.
And people, if you started this show a little late, make sure you can check on iTunes, on Stitcher, and also the video will be up on YouTube in the next day or two. You can watch it there. And we want to thank you, Frank, so much. Frank Joseph. Go to ancientamerica.com or go to Amazon, get his new book, Atlantis and the Coming Ice Age. So we appreciate you, and come back soon.
Thanks, Frank.
Oh, absolutely. So just give me a call and we'll do it again.
Oh, don't worry. You'll hear from us. Hear from us. Take care.
Okay, great.
All right. That was amazing, Walt.
It was incredible. I've always said for years I had a 1978 Diesel Rabbit that got 55 miles to the gallon.
Oh, really?
Yeah, back in 1978.
That's pretty damn good back then.
Yes, that's my point.
Yeah.
Has it changed much from then to
Not
now?
really.
No,
Not really.
but you darn well know there's been technology
Oh my
to
God.
improve mileage. Please.
You can actually on water. You can use water to power.
Sure.
And
Sure.
it just doesn't make sense. It's
No.
the oil companies.
Absolutely.
And it's all about money and it's all about greed. Like
Yes, it
you
is.
said, the
It
Atlantis
is.
they had the technology,
They did.
but they got greedy. And
Yeah.
so, people, this is what we need to learn from. You can go to truthbetoldwebtv.com, and that's our website. Check out upcoming shows, who's going to be on the show. Next Friday, we are going to be
broadcasting live
from
at
Conscious Life Expo. Yes.
Which will be at the Los Angeles Hilton, LAX Hilton. And
Yes.
you can come check it out there. Tickets are still available.
Yep.
And be there or
Come see us.
be square.
Booth number 203. We're going to be
Oh,
streaming from the
203?
booth. Yeah.
Okay.
We switched. We got a bigger
we
booth.
moved. Oh, size does matter.
It
cool.
does matter.
So come by and say hi.
And like I said, make sure you guys tell your friends about Truth Be Told. And if you have something you want to talk about or somebody you want us to interview, let us know. We'd love to hear about it.
Absolutely.
All right.
We
so
read everything that comes in.
everything. So, all right, friends. Well, we'll see you. And Eddie, our prayers with you.
Eddie, we definitely are.
And Walt, thank you so much for doing a great job as
My
usual.
pleasure.
All right. We're out of here. Take care. We'll see you next time.